It's been said that nothing brings people together more than an external threat. And it's also true that dealing with threats can create divisions. Take Israel, for example, where the recent signing of the Iran nuclear deal has deepened existing conflicts among Israelis and also among Jews worldwide who disagree with Israel's policies. To help us understand the nature of this family feud, we welcome Aluf Benn. He's editor-in-chief of Israel's oldest newspaper, Haaretz. And it's great to welcome you here to TVO.
Thank you.
Can we just understand, first of all, what place Haaretz occupies in Israel on the journalistic firmament there?
We are the voice of liberals in Israel.
You happy with that?
Of course.
Is it lonely these days?
You know, Haaretz always had a kind of critical point of view. And one of the former prime ministers, Golda Meir or Begin, argued that the last government supported by Haaretz was the British mandate.
So you're used to being out.
But as a journalist, it's a good position to be in.
Your newspaper's editorial stance on the Iran nuclear deal, what was it?
It was that Israel should go with Obama. That even if the deal is not perfect, it's preferable to war or to other alternatives that don't really exist. And that in the end of the day, Israel's interest is in having good relationship with the United States. And rather than fight the president, once the deal is done, Israel should get the best deal it can with the United States regarding security compensation and understandings about the future.
When you came out for the deal, what was the feedback like?
Well, interestingly, it's not such a spoken topic among Israelis. And that has been the case for years. You know, it was seen as kind of one of the oddities of a foreign policy issue that's very important to the leadership or to the military leaders and so on. But the public delegates the debate to the politicians, or to a select group of people in the know, and otherwise minds other business.
Let's hear from one of those politicians. Here's how your prime minister reacted after the president of the United States said we have a deal. Roll tape, please.
The nuclear deal with Iran doesn't block Iran's path to the bomb. It actually paves Iran's path to the bomb. Worse, it gives Iran two paths to the bomb. Iran can get to the bomb by keeping the deal, or Iran could get to the bomb by violating the deal. Under the deal, if a facility is suspected of housing hidden nuclear activity, inspectors must wait at least 24 days. That's 24 days before getting access to those suspected sites. Not only that, the inspectors must first share with Iran the critical intelligence that led them to suspect the sites in the first place. I don't oppose this deal because I want war. I oppose this deal because I want to prevent war. And this deal will bring war. It will spark a nuclear arms race in the region, and it would feed Iran's terrorism and aggression. That would make war, perhaps the most horrific war of all, far more likely.
Okay, Prime Minister Netanyahu opposes the deal. Republicans in the United States oppose the deal. The Jewish diaspora, I think on both sides of the border, in the United States and Canada, oppose the deal. Some Democrats, Chuck Schumer, Democratic senator from New York, opposes the deal. A lot of people don't like this. I think public opinion in Israel is against the deal. Isn't that the case?
To a large extent, it is.
To a large extent. What are the arguments that in Israel are most persuasive against this deal?
That it might ease Iran's way back to the West, and that it gives Iran a lot of cash that's now either frozen or simply doesn't exist because the lack of trade and investment in Iran. And with that cash, Iran could fund its allies across our border, Hezbollah and Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza, providing them with more rockets, with more sophisticated weapon systems to target Israel and so on.
That sounds like a lot to be afraid of. So why does your newspaper not see it that way?
Because we believe that American support is more important to Israel than counting the warheads of Hezbollah, because the most effective way to deal with these threats is American support.
I want to be careful in asking this next question, but we have heard We've heard a lot of references to the Holocaust during the World War II years as reasons to oppose this deal. You're welcoming a new Holocaust. This will usher in a new Holocaust.
Netanyahu has been making this argument for several years. Even before his return to power, he argued that Iran is Germany and we're in 1938. And without saying it explicitly, he alluded that the American administration and President Obama in particular are the present-day reincarnations of Neville Chamberlain, and that this deal is Munich. But the Israeli public never agreed, and never bought this argument. How do I know? Because look at what Israelis have been doing in this past decade. Rather than, we all know that most people who were saved from the Holocaust, from the original one, were people whose families emigrated from Europe to Canada, to the United States, to Palestine, like my family. And if Israelis were really afraid of a Holocaust, you would have seen mass immigration out of Israel. You would have seen people cashing out of their apartments and just buying foreign currency.
Not happening.
The contrary. The price of real estate in Israel, and especially in the Tel Aviv area, and in particular in the area around the military headquarters, which is the prime target in Israel, has doubled in the past 8 years. So people feel that Israel is strong and that Israel is there to stay rather than be annihilated by Iran or by some other enemy.
We have had Yossi Klein Halevi in that chair numerous times in the studio. I see you smiling. You know him well, former journalist and now affiliated with a think tank in Israel. Let's play a clip from a previous interview we did with him a couple of years ago, and then we'll come back and chat. Let's roll it, please.
On an issue that Israel has identified as existential, stopping a nuclear Iran, it will have lost its ability to protect itself. And it will have, in effect, ceded its self-defense to the United States. And here the crucial question becomes, can Israel trust President Obama's resolve on Iran? When he says, I've got a red line on Iran, is his red line on Iran more serious than his red line was on Syria? And yet Obama blinked. And if he blinked on what was such a straightforward issue over enforcing his own red line, he's the one who defined a use of chemical weapons as a red line. And not only does Assad, a two-bit dictator who is fighting for his life, defy the American president, but he gets away with it.
Do Israelis trust this American president?
This American president was never popular with Israelis. Since his early days in office, when he came to visit the Middle East, that was back in the early summer of 2009, and skipped Israel. He visited Turkey, he visited Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, where he gave his famous address in Cairo.
First foreign policy speech.
And he skipped Israel. He only came to Israel after his re-election 4 years later, but that was too late. Now, clearly the idea was to show the Arabs and Muslims around the world that his policy is not coordinated and not as tied with Israel's as was George W. Bush's. And in this way, to relieve some of the anti-American pressure that was cooking within the Arab and Muslim world. But that cost him with the trust of Israelis on both sides of the aisle. To right-wing Israelis, he was seen and is still seen as a hopeless case of a pro-Arab Hussein guy who doesn't care about the survival and the strength of Israel. To left-wing Israelis, he was seen as an incompetent president, making high speeches about the need to end the occupation and settlements in the West Bank, but does little or nothing, or next to nothing, to change that. The best he did was to give a half-hearted mandate to John Kerry for, to run empty-handed between Netanyahu and Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian president. Mm-hmm. So Obama has never been very popular with Israelis, despite the fact that is, by the way, unchallenged by nobody in Israel, that under his watch, the level of security, military, and intelligence cooperation between the U.S. and Israel is unprecedented.
That's an interesting conundrum, isn't it? Israel's done well in certain areas under Obama's watch, but people don't feel better about him.
Yeah, but they feel better about their own security. Obama doesn't run for elections in Israel, and there is an explanation. the one way for the Americans to prevent Israel from going to war unilaterally against Iran in the past 6 years was to hug the Israeli security and defense and intelligence establishment, and giving them most of whatever they wanted in order to keep them at bay and prevent them from supporting Netanyahu's idea of launching a preemptive strike against Iran, which never happened.
Right. Israel, we can say this, Israel has nuclear weapons. Israel has a nuclear deterrent against whatever Iran might develop.
Which, by the way, again, if Israel were, Israel did not just sit tight and said, okay, either we bomb Iran or we're doomed. At the same time, Israel has been building a considerable submarine fleet, which is seen as a second strike capability. And that implies that Israeli defense planners assume that someday someone else in the region might have the ability for a first strike against Israel, because otherwise, why spend all this money on a submarine fleet if you're not afraid of a nuclear threat?
I understand that. There is so much lip service paid in Israel, though, to never acknowledging that you have nuclear weapons, and you do. Even your newspaper says, reportedly Israel has nuclear weapons.
That's a policy of ambiguity that is enforced by censorship in Israel, and the policy, it was designed in the 1960s and then enshrined in a spoken agreement between Israeli and American leaders, which says that Israel would not test or acknowledge the existence of nuclear weapons. And it's been a pretty good policy. So there's very little debate about it in Israel.
Okay, but you're not in Israel right now, and there's no Israeli censor that's going to censor what you have to say. So will you want to acknowledge that Israel has 200 nuclear warheads and it's...
I never counted them. So I cannot acknowledge the numbers of warheads.
That you have not counted.
And so on.
Can you comment on why the existence of those warheads has not had a more calming effect on Israel's sense of security?
First of all, I believe it has. As I said, people buy real estate, and the Israeli economy is booming. So you cannot argue that people are really afraid of annihilation at any given moment. The main problem was that the threats that Israel has been facing in the past 40, 45 years, since the 1973 Yom Kippur War, were the kind of threats that nuclear weapons or a nuclear option or a nuclear capability cannot protect you from.
Right.
Stabbings, suicide bombings, conventional rockets fired from across the border, people running over other people with cars. No nuclear bomb or an intercontinental ballistic missile is going to protect you from these. So you have a plethora of threats. And clearly the assumption that Israel has a considerable nuclear option did away with the conventional threat, even long before the Arab states disintegrated.
I want to read something that you wrote in Haaretz. This was back in June of last year. You wrote, and Sheldon, I'm at the top of page 4 now, you wrote, "The Israeli discourse, which for 2 decades sanctified the two-state solution, has reverted back to the period before recognition of the Palestine Liberation Organization and before the Oslo process. In a world like this, Arab-Israeli peace sounds like an off-the-wall notion from the last century, not a practical, attainable goal." My question is, how permanently off the table do you believe peace between Israeli Jews and Palestinian Arabs is today?
Well, this was, I don't even recall this piece, but it was right on the mark, because if you looked at the Israeli election campaign earlier this year, none of the parties, not even the Arab Party or any of the Zionist left-wing parties, promoted the two-state solution. Okay, if you dig deep and read somewhere in page 39 in their platform, it's there. But no politician raised that flag.
How come?
Because they saw it as a loser.
There's nobody
Now, that doesn't mean that it's not going to happen anytime. It means that it's not part of the political discourse in Israel today, and that the mainstream political thinking across the aisle believes it's impossible. because there is no partner, because, I mean, now your political position would determine your explanation. But the one-state argument, which was off the table for many, many years, is now back there as something, not just as a reality, but as something that Israelis need to aspire to. And no lesser voice than the state president, Reuven Rivlin. Ruvi was, I think, the first and foremost liberal in Israeli politics. He supports one state with Israel naturalizing the Palestinians in the West Bank and giving them equal civil rights.
The argument I've always heard about that is that's a bad idea for Israeli Jews because it's a quote-unquote demographic ticking time bomb, which eventually will lead to Palestinians, because they have more children, taking over, and the Jewish state no longer is the Jewish state. What do you think?
Well, that has been a mainstay of the left-wing argument for years, and then at some point, some people in the right wing adopted it as well. What I think is that most Israelis don't feel it, and they don't see it as an imminent threat. Mostly, I believe, because they have zero integration with the Palestinians. Gaza is totally sealed off, and the West Bank is off limits to most Israelis, and most people won't go there. They don't interact with Palestinians. When I was a kid, Palestinians from the West Bank and Gaza, we didn't even call them Palestinians at the time. We called them Arabs from the territories. They were everywhere. They were in the gas stations, in the restaurants, the construction sites, the fields, factories. They were the working class of Israel. Today, there's no interaction. So people don't feel the sense that they would be overwhelmed by invisible people coming from somewhere, and people accept the status quo as livable, even if they don't like it when they think about it. But in their daily lives, they just don't think about it.
I started with a question about your newspaper, and I want to finish off with a question about your newspaper. The subtitle of a 2011 article about Haaretz in New Yorker had this as the subtitle: Haaretz prides itself on being the conscience of Israel. Does it have a future? 4 years later, how does the future look?
Well, it's more difficult today with a very strong right-wing government that is trying. Its main effort is not about a two-state or one state, or not even about the Iran deal, but about changing the cultural and academic discourse in Israel. And we're the opposition voice to that. But as I said to a journalist, the opposition is always the best position.
Aluf Benn, editor-in-chief of Haaretz. Good to have you here at TVO tonight. Toda rabah.
Thank you, and Shana Tova.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.